There were people who would call me late at night just to make sure I was still alive. Not to just check in, not to catch up, but to make sure I hadn't wrapped my car around a telephone pole somewhere between the bar and my house. If there was an accident on the road near where I lived, my phone would ring. People needed to know that it wasn't me. That was my life after my divorce. And the crazy part, at the time, I thought I was fine. This is the story I'm most ashamed of. It's the version of myself that I look back on and I barely even recognize myself. But I'm telling it anyways because if you're going through a divorce right now and you're starting to head down this road, I want you to see where it leads you before you get there. It would start on Fridays. I would leave work, head to the bar, and tell myself I was just going to have a couple drinks. That was the plan every single weekend. And it almost never happened that way. A couple drinks turned into closing the bar. Closing the bar would turn into an after party. An after party would turn into watching the sun come up on Saturday morning. I'd finally make it home, sleep for a few hours, wake up around noon, take a shower, and then do the whole thing over again. Saturday afternoon, back at the bar. Saturday night into Sunday morning. Sunday into Monday. I'd get home at 3 or 4 in the morning, sleep for a couple hours, take a shower, and somehow be sitting at my desk by 7 a.m. at work. I worked in a small satellite office. There were only 8 of us that worked out of that office. On Mondays and Fridays, I was usually the only one in the office. I'd walk in still half drunk from the weekend, lock the office door, lay down on the floor and sleep because there was nobody there to see me, or at least that's what I told myself. The truth is, everybody knew. My coworkers could smell it. They saw it. Word travels. People knew exactly how I was living. They just didn't know what to do about it. And that's where the nickname came from, Downtown Dan. That became my identity. The guy who was always downtown, always at the bar, always at the center of what was ever happening. Back then, I wore that nickname like it was something to be proud of. Today, I hear it very differently. The parties I ended up at were not backyard barbecues with friends. They were at houses I had never been to, owned by people I had never even met. I was in my 40s. Most of the people there were in their 20s. I'd walk through the front door and people would literally ask, "Who is this guy? Is he a cop?" Imagine that for a second. You're a grown man standing in a stranger's house being questioned by 20-something-year-olds because they think you're an undercover police officer. That's where my life had gone. There were drugs. There were weapons. There were situations that absolutely had no business becoming part of my life. And yet, every weekend I'd find myself right back there. Looking back, I realized it was never really about the alcohol. It wasn't about even being at the parties. It was about belonging. My marriage was over. The life that I had built had disappeared. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I was so desperate to belong somewhere, anywhere, that I ended up in rooms full of people who had absolutely nothing to offer me except one thing. They didn't tell me to leave. For a little while, that was enough. I kept telling myself I was just blowing off steam, that I'd get serious eventually. But that eventually never came. Instead, my life kept getting darker. I'd wake up the next afternoon and grab my phone. There'd be Facebook messages, text messages, missed calls. Did you make it home? You good? Let me know if you made it. My friends already knew where I'd been. They knew how much I'd been drinking. They knew there was a good chance I'd driven home anyway. They weren't just checking in because they wanted to talk. They were checking because they honestly didn't know if I'd survived the drive. Sometimes I'd answer them, and sometimes I wouldn't. And every once in a while, I'd scroll farther down my phone and find messages that I had sent the night before, messages I had absolutely no memory of writing. I'd sit there staring at my own words, trying to piece together conversations I couldn't even remember having. That should have scared me, but it didn't. I just laughed it off and I told myself, I just had another crazy weekend. I told myself I was having fun. I told myself I was fine, but truly, I wasn't. And eventually, my body started keeping score. At first, it was just little things. I looked tired all the time, and then I started looking older. Not a little older, like years older. And one morning, I looked in the mirror, and something wasn't right. The whites of my eyes were turning yellow, jaundice. My body was breaking down in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. I could see it. The people around me could see it. I looked like a completely different man than I had been a year before. Older, hollower, worn down in a way that no amount of sleep was going to fix. My coworker started pulling me aside, telling me, "We're praying for you, Dan." Not because they knew exactly what to say, because they didn't know what else to do. People weren't just asking how I was anymore. They were checking to make sure I was still alive. Then there was the head of security at the main bar I used to hang out at. He was a retired sheriff. He spent his life seeing people make bad decisions, and he knew exactly what I was doing. He knew that I was drinking way too much. He knew I was driving when I never should have been behind the wheel. He knew the life I was living. Every now and then, he'd check on me, not because, he wanted anything from me, because he honestly wasn't sure if I was going to survive it. And then there were nights when someone would tell me that there had been a bad accident on one of the back roads near my house. My phone would start ringing. Messages would start to come in on my cell phone. People wanted to know if it was me. Think about that. The people who loved me had reached the point where hearing about a fatal crash made them wonder if I was the one who had died in that accident. That was my reality. That was downtown Dan for a long time. I still didn't see it. I thought I was blowing off steam, and I thought, I deserved to live a little bit differently than I wanted to, or than that I should after all I had been through. I thought eventually I'd settle down, but you want to know what? Eventually, it never came until one day I finally looked at my life honestly. I saw a man sleeping in the office on the floor Monday mornings. A man waking up to conversations he could never remember having. A man standing in strangers' houses trying to fit in with people half his age. A man whose coworkers were praying for him. A man whose friends stayed awake waiting to make sure that he got home alive. A man looking back at himself in the mirror with yellow eyes. That wasn't who I was. That was the pain, what the pain had turned me into because I refused to face it. I'm not telling you this story because I'm proud of it. I'm telling you this because I know there are men watching this who are somewhere going down that same road. Maybe you're only a few weeks into it. Maybe the weekends are just starting to get away from you. Maybe you're already telling yourself exactly what I told myself. I'm just having fun. I'll get serious later. Be careful. Later is expensive. Later cost me my health. Later cost me my mental peace. Later stole months, maybe years that I could have spent healing instead of hiding. Running from the pain doesn't make it disappear. It just changes where it shows up. And for me, it showed up in bars. It showed up in strangers' houses. It showed up in my health. It showed up in the people who loved me, worrying that every late night phone call might be the one telling them I was gone. I eventually got out, not overnight, not easily. I had to get sober. I had to change the people I spent my time with. I had to stop chasing acceptance from people who couldn't help me become the man I wanted to be. And most importantly, I had to face the pain that's been trying me so hard and me trying to outrun. Because that's what Downtown Dan really was. He wasn't the life of the party. He wasn't the fun guy. He was the broken man trying to stay busy long enough that he wouldn't have to think about what he had lost. Today, when I hear that nickname, I don't hear the man that I became. I hear the man that survived. If this story sounds familiar, if you're someone out there going down that same road, don't wait until the people who love you are wondering whether you made it home alive or not. You can turn around before it costs you what it cost me. If this story resonated with you, subscribe. Every video on this channel is another chapter of what divorce really looked like for me and what it took to rebuild my life. And if you're still in the middle of your own story, watch the next video. I made it for you.